So yes, the title of the talk is rather self-serving in a way, creativity on demand. What we are trying to do is to develop a new form of tool, which we label co-creative AI tools. So tools that leverage creativity to augment, leverage AI to augment human creativity, to help people who are working in professions that are not typically seen as in the creative industries. So I'm going to be talking about sports coaching in professional football, for example. I'm going to be talking about design, which is creativity. And I'm going to be talking, for example, also about owners and directors of small businesses, people running corner shops and these kinds of things, people that you would not associate as people needing to think creatively. But there are our target markets for these audiences. So to be traditional, this is what I'm going to say. First of all, I'm going to try and make a case for why we need to create more creativity in all aspects of professional work and not just in the creative industries. I'm then going to talk about this CBAE vision. So CBAE is the Centre for Creativity Enabled by AI. We tend to express it this way as a simple acronym. Our vision really is around human-centered AI. So it's AI that supports and augments humans rather than trying to over-automate, that uses codified creativity knowledge. So the essence of our approach, which distinguishes ourselves from GPT-based approaches, is that we acknowledge there is a very large body of knowledge about good practices, successful practices for creative problem solving and creative thinking. And there's a kind of disconnect because most of this knowledge is not found in digital tools that support human creativity. That knowledge has not been codified. So our approach is to try and take this body of knowledge, codify it in forms that can be manipulated by algorithms, AI algorithms, and deliver it through interactive tools to support human creativity. Now, we cannot ignore GPT, which came along over the last year. So we have also integrated some concepts of large language models, and you'll see these in our approach as well. I'm going to be quite pragmatic here. This is kind of the Room 101 presentation of our work. So it is looking a little bit at the underlying theories and principles, but it's also going to be pragmatic and give you two demonstrations of two of our emerging products. One is called Sports Sparks, which is designed to stimulate creative thinking for problem solving by sports coaches in a range of sports at both the elite and what we call the grassroots level. And then something that's maybe a bit closer to home, which is called the Ideation Suite, which is for product and service designers, a little bit less evolved. I had hoped to come here with the first version of something called Business Sparks, which is helping business owners and directors think creatively about their business strategies and models. But it's about 2 weeks away from first release, and my development team really pushed back on giving me a first version to show here because we want to do this properly. So I'll talk about that with some screen grabs and give you an overall direction at the end. And really, I'm here to talk and to collaborate, opening the door to various collaborations for research, practice. So hopefully I'm pushing an open door with this one. This argument has been made. I'm here within a school that highlights AI, business and creativity. So I'm hoping there's a rationale for this. We certainly noticed this even in the duration of our project, that more and more businesses and organizations are coming to us talking much more explicitly about creativity rather than innovation. Now, I see those two things as different. I'm not going to separate them here in definitions. Hopefully you know what they are. But people are now saying we really need to be more creative to deal with the challenges facing. And there are many drivers for that. And a lot of those drivers are evidenced in what is written. Most people recognize that it's an increasing demand in work. World Economic Forum recognized it was one of the 3 key skills alongside complex problem solving. They actually separated creative thinking from complex problem solving. We actually think the two are the same because you need to think creatively to solve those complex problems. So according to the World Economic Forum, is a key driver in our workforce. Nesta, a UK body, acknowledged that it's probably the most significant predictor of occupation growth by 2030. Going backwards, it's been associated with improved organisational performance. It is a key driver and precondition for downstream innovation. What are you going to innovate if you haven't got something that's new and useful? And if we go beyond business, it's even associated with English. So if nothing else, I'm trying to make people happier, but also perhaps more productive and innovative in that process. So we take it as given that we want more creativity. The interesting question is the nature of that creativity and how do we stimulate it? So let me just give you a working definition. It's a very simple definition, which underpins a lot of our work. What is creativity? We define it as the ability to produce work that is both novel and appropriate. This is, to me, a prototypical definition of the dozens, if not hundreds, of definitions of creativity that are out there. This one comes from Sternberg and Lubbert, a couple of psychologists. There shouldn't be any surprises in there. Most people would know that novelty is associated with creativity. You're trying to come up with something that is different in some way to what's out there in the past. Perhaps this notion of appropriateness or relevance to the goal of the task is perhaps more surprising, but it's in there because it distinguishes creative thinking from something that in English you might call wacky or strange. So the usual example I make here is if I was to try and stand on my head propped up against this wall for the next 30 seconds, that's probably new in the sense that no seminar speakers actually stood on their head during a presentation here. I'm just guessing, but I'm assuming that's the case. But it would not be appropriate to the task because I'd probably pass out or hurt myself, certainly at my age, long before, and therefore I would not achieve the goal of continuing to communicate. So creativity is very much about novel and appropriate. Now, more interestingly, there's been a lot of work looking at the different types of creativity and the different types of creative outcomes. And James Kaufman and Ron Baghetto provided a really nice taxonomy of the different levels of creative outcome. There are 4 levels in their model. I'm only going to focus on 2 here because I think they're most relevant to creativity business. So when most people working and trying to support business are thinking about creativity, they tend to talk about something that could be labeled as pro-fee creativity, professional level expertise. Often in non-creative fields, it's generating. So this might be a new business model for a small business. This might be the design of a new apartment block with some new features that make it more environmentally sustainable. This could be anything that people working in certain professions, certainly some creative industries, might produce in order to make a living. And people in the general public will recognize that as creative. And yes, we are trying to support that with our technologies, but you generally can't go straight to that. So our argument is actually there's a lot of gain to be had in designing digital tools that support what Kaufman and Baghetto called little c creativity. Now, these are everyday activities, often undertaken by non-experts in their field, can also be expert and have knowledge, that are often not perceived to be creative by the majority of people working. Little nudges in creativity. So we used to do a lot of work in care homes for older people. A lot of the creative tasks we found ourselves supporting was understanding what volume to play the radio at for the older person in the room when they wanted to listen to the garden program. The sequence of things they did things in the day, the sorts of foods they ate and how they ate it, that were actually very important to the quality of life of these people at the end of their lives. Most people would not consider that to be creative, but they were very important in trying to grow a change in the outcomes and quality of life of these people. So our argument is that, yes, we're seeking to support business professionals to be more creative, to generate these professional level creativity outcomes. But that doesn't happen on its own. It happens through multiple little c creative outcomes that aggregated together over time tend to enable us to produce these smaller number of important outcomes, such as the design or a new business model. And that's very much consistent with my experiences. I was actually in this building 15 years ago, realizing we ran a creativity workshop with people associated with Airbus. And one of the things you tend to find in these workshops, you run a workshop over a day and a half or 2 days. And it was quite visible from us that we'd go a long way from the problem to a really quite novel solution in those 2 days through a facilitated creative process. And yet to the participants in the room, it didn't feel creative because they went through lots of little baby steps. And when you got to the end, they would go, that was really great. And you go, yeah. And I'm not just trying to protect our own facilitation and design, but you could look back and see that that's how the creativity happens. So it's this kind of everyday little C creativity that you're trying to encourage, I think, in a lot of professional domains. I think the other thing to recognize is, and this is an issue I have with a lot of work on AI and creativity and large language models and so on, is that there's a very large body of knowledge around methods, techniques, and case studies for effective creative thinking. The body of publications is vast, and it goes back 50s and 60s. It's been around for 60, 70 years. And a lot of these techniques and methods are the ones that I teach to students on an MBA program or master's programs. They're the ones we use when facilitating manually with our technologies. Surely some of our digitization should be trying to leverage this knowledge and push and reinforce what works and discourage what doesn't work, rather than starting again. So we argue that there's great benefit to be had from leveraging, digitizing and codifying knowledge about these established creative thinking techniques and methods. I actually have some quite interesting discussions with my own dev team who go, if we could do this, isn't that really cool? I go, yeah, but it's not consistent with this framework or this type of creativity or this methodology. And so we need to be careful that we're not breaking this effective way of working by doing it in technology, by automating just because we can. So what do we need for effective creative thinking? So we can take the Teresa Amabile component model of creativity. She argues there are three basic components, preconditions for effective creativity. The first is domain expertise. You have to have some knowledge of the problems and the solutions that are in the sector that you're working. So if you're a sports coach, you need to know something about coaching the problems that athletes have. You also need to have a degree of intrinsic task motivation. You need to be motivated to do the work, motivated to think creatively, motivated to build solutions that can be worked. And third, she argues that you need creative thinking skills. Now, we assert in our work, based on numerous observations in the most business sectors, there's domain expertise. They know a lot about the sector in which their business works. Most of the time, they're motivated. But most people have very little, if any, formal creative thinking training or education to give them the skills. It's brainstorming with Post-its. I ban Post-its. I've almost banned Miro in my team as well, because that's all equally problematic, right? Because that's what people think creative thinking is. It's a tiny fraction of it, and most people misuse it. So our argument is that most people don't have the creative thinking skills to be creative every day in their business or professional activities. Now, you could argue what's going on here, because this stuff it's been published for 60, 70 years. I think there are a number of barriers to the effective take-up, the training, facilitation, and take-up of this knowledge. First of all, it's surprisingly inaccessible, still buried away in lots of websites, in very long descriptive forms that are not really designed for quick use. It's in academic papers, white papers. It's quite hard for a lot of business people just to find and then translate from the more academic style in which it's written. Even if you're able to introduce the knowledge, it's very hard to organize time and resources to run workshops, give people the space to incubate. And that was always an argument we had to fight with our clients. Listen, we need time. We want a day's workshop to incubate this, to properly follow a creative process. And there's generally a lack of management support for this. Let's run a workshop to be more productive. Yes. Let's run a workshop to be more innovative. Yes. Let's be more creative. You sure that's what we're really about? It's a bit dangerous to get our employees to be more creative. So numerous barriers. These are also reported in the literature, and these are barriers that we've encountered time and time again. The clear alternative is to embed some of this creativity knowledge to deliver the missing creative thinking skills in everyday tools that people can use every day, on the bus, in the office, basically on your mobile phone, your creative buddy in your pocket. We keep talking about your creative friend in your pocket, because that's why we think that this is how we think this can be done. And we can do this by codifying some of this creativity knowledge that we know works. Let's go back through these 50, 60 years of publications into forms that people can use for everyday creative thinking. Link it to all the new forms of automated idea generation. So you're using this knowledge to filter the idea generation you might do with, say, GPT-3 or 4, and explicitly design the interaction so it's co-created, which isn't really what you get if you use ChatGPT. Just generate some ideas in a really rubbish interface. It has its benefits, it's simple, but it's not really facilitating a co-creative process. And it's become very skilled at copy and pasting and understanding all the parameters that are there behind in the playground of ChatGPT. So that's our approach. Codify this existing creativity knowledge, use it to direct ideation using other tools, and design explicitly for co-creation. Now you can judge whether we're doing that because I'm going to show you some examples. Now we're doing all of this with a new funded, not so new now, funded project called CBAE. It stands for creativity enabled by AI. It's funded by a UK funding body called Research England. Total value with all the industrial partners is £7.6 million. I've lost track of what that is in euros, probably about 9 at the moment. I was going to say 7.6, but that's a joke. It started in October 2020, so we started in the depths of the pandemic, which was an interesting time to start a project that's very much about knowledge exchange. So our remit is less about producing high quality research papers. It's more about using our knowledge to undertake applied design research in order to get it out there into practice. Because there's been work on digital creativity tools that goes back from the 1980s, before AI was really applicable in this context. And almost none of that work has made its way into everyday practice. I think that's starting to change, but I think there's a barrier. We have to understand what those barriers are to the uptake. And we're working in different sectors. So we have a product called Jet, which is supporting creative thinking. It's delivering creative intelligence to journalists so that he or she or an editor can come up with new creative angles and insights as he or she is writing. It's like the Microsoft paperclip jumping up on the right-hand side saying, have you thought about this angle on the thing you're writing about? Sports coaching. We've identified there's an interesting area in sports coaching. You think sports is competitive, therefore it's creative. Maybe less than we think. There's an opportunity. Service and product design. I'll talk about the ideation suite soon. And then our new tool, Business Sparks, which is supporting small business owners to think more creatively about their business strategies and models. And because we're pragmatic, we take a pragmatic approach to the reasoning to the redesign of the tool design. We're designing for what we think works. So one of the consequences is that we have hybrid machine reasoning mechanisms. So we're not dependent on one form of reasoning. And in fact, I'm almost proud, partly because of my age, to go back to some of the symbolic AI approaches that exist of case-based reasoning and heuristic rule-based reasoning, because they have a role when you build them to interoperate with large language models. And all of this is coming together to try and offer what we call creativity on demand. I've got a problem. Ding, 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 ding. Can this help me think creatively as I sit in a workshop, as I'm in a meeting, as I'm on my way to a meeting? This is where we think creativity should and can be delivered more effectively in businesses. So let me kind of give you an overview of how this, I think, our work sits with large language models, because this is the very large elephant in the room that I need to point out quickly. So by large language models, I'm talking about tools like GPT, GP4, and their emerging competitors. We all know what they do. Everyone here has probably played with them. Everyone online has played with them. We start to understand their limits as much as their strengths. I'm going to make an argument here that the novelty of any outcomes that you might get in response to a GPT prompt is accidental. It's not directed. They're not designing the machine learning there in order to be creative. Any novelty that you get in an idea that comes out is accidental rather than purposeful. It's not bad, but it's accidental. Generally, you get concrete ideas tool is designed to come back with concrete ideas. You can design prompts to give you something that's more abstract and exploratory, but you tend to get concrete ideas back. How good is that for co-created work if someone's just giving you concrete ideas? And in the current form, I still think they're hard to adopt. We had a 90-minute technical meeting the other day just to understand all the parameters within the GPT models, to understand what it was doing and why it was changing outcomes that we generated before. So we've got postdocs with computer science degrees still trying to figure out how best to use this thing to work within our APIs. So it's hard to adopt for most people, even through the GPT, the chat GPT interface. So our approach, quite different, taking this codified creativity knowledge approach. So we take a technique, for example, one called Scamper. I apologize, it's hay fever. Trees. So Scamper has been a technique that's been around since, heavens, I can't think when it came about. Very well known. You can take that knowledge, and the knowledge of that technique in an abstract form could be codified. And by codifying it, we're arguing that codifying it in algorithms can make the creativity more intentional. It's directed to be creative. More of the ideas that are generated have a chance to be novel and useful because we're directing it using the knowledge that's embedded in those tried and tested techniques. You can use the algorithms to generate spaces of possibilities rather than concrete ideas. So you can direct the user to think about, have you considered ideas for the new kitchen of your house in this area, rather than just saying, you know, you could put the hob 6 inches higher or something. And you're trying to design them so they're simple to adopt. One of the barriers to digital tool uptake has been the friction in the user experience. One of the reasons that Post-its still work is because they're so easy to use. You know, you just get them out, people start writing. Any digital creativity tool has to have the same level or absence of friction. And that's what was treated to strive with some of our outputs. And that means you try not to codify and digitize the whole of the creative process. And CBase is very much in this space. We're focused on the right side, but we are taking in some of the GPT large language model. The other approach that we work, just to be pragmatic, is we use a design science approach. So this is about building and evaluating in context of use. So it's about early prototyping. It's almost like applying design thinking to ourselves, put it that way. So we're taking all of this existing creativity know-how and existing AI approaches and digital creativity tools. We're connecting it to knowledge of a domain, such as sports coaching or service design. And then we have the algorithms, which we collectively call CBase engine, which can produce on demand different creative possibilities for users to work with. Now, something I'm not going to talk about much today is the support for creative self-belief. One of the barriers that we found in a lot of the work that we've done is that the users don't perceive themselves to having to be creative or to think of their work as creative. So there's a body of research that's been developed in the psychology of creativity that's looking at this notion of self-belief. And our argument is that the users have to have a particular perception of their own self-belief in order to work with the tools. So we did a lot of work in newsrooms working with journalists. Now, journalism is one of the creative industries. I can sit there with our tool generating these useful angles and insights and content for them. And they're going, yes, that's interesting, but it's not really what I need to do. I'm like, you're a journalist. Now, shouldn't you be pushing this? But it's kind of like, I just need to report the facts, because their perception of their own creative self-belief is such that they do not believe that they need these tools. So there's a wider issue here about trying to change and evolve the creative self-belief of our users. And if you think it's bad in journalism, you should try this in certain aspects of sports coaching or business. You know, there is this sense creativity is a rather toxic term and people don't want to think of themselves as creative. So I put that in pink because I'm not going to focus on it today. It's another seminar entirely. So a problem comes in, sports coaching problem or a business growth problem. All of this knowledge gets fed into the CBase engine, which generates these on-demand creative possibilities and generates creative solutions to the problem. So that's the basic approach. And it's all about delivering human-centered AI. So I'm a big fan of what Ben Schneiderman said in this. He has three what he calls fresh ideas. They may be less fresh now since he generated them a couple of years ago. But one of the fascinating things he said is that the tools that we generate should be trying to maximize automation. So the tools should be trying to maximize the process of creative ideation. But at the same time, the users must be in full control. Now, at a particular level, that looks like a contradiction. How can you give users maximum control over maximum automation? But actually, once you start to dig into the different design choices that you have, you realize there's actually more to this. So he makes reference to a lot of stuff on our mobile phones, our home systems that we use even without thinking. We've got AI and like alarm systems and so on, which we tend to have a lot of control over. So user control over these technologies to direct the creative thinking in certain ways is key. So I'm going to move on, try and make this a bit more concrete now for the last 15 minutes or so by focusing on a couple of examples. So the first one is called SportsSparks, which was launched in 2022 after a number of years of prototyping with various UK sports organisations. So we're in the area of sports coaching, where our users are not the athletes, they're not the footballers, they are the coaches and the trainers and the physios of these athletes. And our observations and the observations of others working in the field in sports science is that sports coaching often involves quite complex problem solving around the physical, mental well-being, home lives of athletes. However, a literature review that we undertook a few years ago reveals that the number of papers that actually reference creative thinking is probably less than 50 that we were able to find. And I think we did a fairly substantial job. So there is really a disconnect between creativity and sports coaching. And I've sat there with coaches in football clubs and so on, and you realise that they know they have to solve problems, but they don't see it as creative thinking or the potential for it. So there's this creative self-belief comes in. So our argument is to use digital tools using the CBA architecture to deliver creativity on demand for coaching by codifying creativity knowledge for coaching. So I said this project started a little bit before CBA. So we went through a co-design process. That's another of our principles. We always co-design with the users rather than separately mock-up prototypes. We build prototypes, we test all the time and collect feedback. So within this project, we took a number of established creativity techniques that we thought would work based on first interviews, and we simply tried them out in paper form. And we looked at what they liked and what they didn't like, and why they liked it, why they didn't like it, and we worked from there. And then we ran workshops. So we ran workshops with quite expert coaches and said, what are the solutions you typically do if you have this strength and conditioning problem or this mental well-being problem? And they would sort of indicate the strategies. And we started to sort of connect this knowledge together. We built very early prototypes. This is not really visible, but you can see how noddy this prototype is. It's essentially a couple of pull down options and some space to enter text, and it would then generate some spaces of possibilities for you as a coach. We built these very quickly in order to test the idea, and then we went forward, and we've increasingly externalized creative coaching knowledge. And this knowledge has evolved in the field because since we started, we moved away from kind of the physiology and the strength and conditioning, and then we started moving into the whole mental well-being of athletes, which has become a big issue over the last few years. You've got Simone Biles, the gymnast, that started this story with the US gymnastics team, and you see it in cycling and other kinds of sports. So the scope of the creative thinking support has had to increase. And we built this with our sort of standard hybrid machine reasoning architecture. So for those of you of a non-technical disposition, you can look out the window for a minute or make yourself a coffee. But just to explain the pieces of this in broad terms, when the user enters a challenge description for which he or she needs a creative solution or creative ideas, there's all sorts of different natural language processing going on. We're doing different forms of entity extraction. We're using topic modeling based on machine learning to look at the emerging topics and understand sort of what general characteristics. Down here in the possibility generation phase, the codified creativity knowledge is driving heuristic reasoning. Joked about sort of going back to symbolic AI, but that heuristic reasoning, you can think about it in one GPT sense, it's used to more effectively engineer the prompts. Why not? You have this knowledge about what works and what doesn't. Use it in a codified form. We use a lot of creative search to go and find other documents. So not what the user wants, but what he or she might want, using creative expansion of the queries. And I also am a big fan of case-based reasoning. That's a personal preference of mine, but coaches always want to learn from past examples. So analogical reasoning engines that run on top of existing cases. And then the creative guidance that comes out of the outputs of the application of this reasoning, the possibilities then support both sparks, as you'll see, these are sparks that direct you to certain spaces to explore ideas, and also the auto idea generation. So that gives you a sort of flavor of some of the technologies that are behind this architecture. And although we're an academic group, we have a lot of professional software engineers working. We're trying to build production. We are building production software. We're building products to sell. So all of this is part of that program solution. So just to give you a couple of examples here. So I'm going to show you how this works. The URL is on the side there if you want to create an account for yourself. It's still free in its basic form. Everything we build is web applications, but it's optimized for mobile for the reasons it can be in your pocket. All right, because that's how most people want to be creative. And so this is where a user can enter a particular challenge. So he can either use the Siri feature or the voice input feature to put in a description, and all he has to do is identify who's it about and some basic tags. So what I've got here is a challenge in which a para-athlete is not training effectively, performance is not improving, training sessions often end early, and she is struggling with motivation and focus. It's based on a real challenge. We're able to indicate who's affected here. It's the para-athlete and the coach. And then we can direct the reasoning here. So rather than you have to faff around and play with GPT prompts, we're able just to say, I want this to be more about mental well-being or home environment. But if I want to change the direction of the reasoning, I can make this more around family life, or maybe not family life, but brain's gone, there's about 20 of these, but it could be around strength and conditioning or something like this. So you can direct the algorithms simply by choosing different options from pull down. So that's it. And if I just run that, I think you just sort of shows, this is a bit of boring animation before I get run. So what happens is, whenever you press this update challenge button, the tool starts to generate different kinds of sparks. So this is where the word sports sparks. A spark is a piece of text that directs you to a possible space of ideas. It's not generating the ideas, and you'll see they're framed very much as questions. So what we've got here are different tabs. We've redesigning this to be a bit simpler. We have tabs within tabs, which was never a good UI thing, so this has been simplified. But exploring the problem space, looking at the solution space, and imagining, which is a kind of constraint removal technique. So all of these are driven by techniques underneath. So you can see the sorts of questions. The tool is generating how might we offer more age-appropriate training sessions for the para-athlete? How can we exploit the para-athlete's related skills? You can refresh. How can we address the coach's energy levels? Maybe it's the coach. So all of these, you're not saying these are ideas, but it's encouraging you, nudging you to different spaces. So the machine reasoning is generating these possibilities, of which there are potentially tens of thousands for each, rather than generating the ideas. Let me just move quickly into the solutions to give you an idea of what some of these look like. You can explore solution spaces by asking how might we develop the para-athletes' understanding using stand-ins for their opponents. Just bring people in to be their opponent training process. Develop the para-athlete's mindset by offering as much time as is needed. Now, a lot of these seem quite simple, but you get a lot of kind of aha moments when you put these in front of coaches. Of course, they're valuable. At any point, you may have, I didn't miss that, but basically we always give the users the ability to describe ideas by giving them partially completed ideas. That's really important. The blank sheet of paper is a disaster. You can easily use NLP to take a spark and reform it into the stem of an idea. So you've sort of got partial idea generation, and that's really quite effective about simple sort of design heuristics that emerged in research. So the Sports Sparks has many, many different features. It's able to go and find academic papers and generate ideas and themes from those, from coaching practices. It's also got its own case studies where you can do the case-based reasoning and learn from each cases, but I haven't got time to show it. And eventually you can go through and generate an entire action plan, but that's short time. So that's kind of what it looks like. And we've run a number of qualitative early evaluations. I wouldn't call these case studies yet, but they're evaluations. First in 2021 was with 22 different professional sports practitioners that had access to an earlier version of the tool. They worked in football, skiing, rowing, athletics, and so on. So they worked across sectors. They worked in UK national sporting bodies, such as those that train Olympic athletes, and in Premier League football clubs. And we used a survey questionnaire-based approach with follow-up literals. It was interesting that the majority, in all cases, when asked about the different features, reported discovering alternative views on both the challenge and the different coaching options. We were able to open up new spaces of possibilities that they found useful. And most reported that their decision-making processes were influenced by the use of the tool, even with a small amount of training and limited exposure. So it seemed to be working in the majority of cases, if not all. We then ran a more in-depth study in one Premier League football club about 6 months later, in which the tool was used for a longer period by some coaches, physios, and one other medical member of the coaching staff behind the first team. And they reported, again, there's lots of literals in the paper we reported in expert systems. They certainly valued the different kinds of generated sparks and the types of directions the tool pushed them in. They certainly valued the discovered learning resources. And we think this is one way into certain sectors is people are used to go finding resources. Coaches often go and look for what other coaches have done. So laying creativity support on top of training videos or academic papers as a way forward. And they also valued some of the ideas of the idea management behind the tool. So again, we're making progress here, but we haven't ran full-on case studies yet. So that's Sports Sparks. That was an interesting activity for us to sort of really try out a lot of our software ideas at the time here. So the second product that we've launched in, I think it's February of this year, is called the Ideation Suite. Now, just to confuse you, we're going to rename it to Design Sparks because my marketing team have decided that, but at the moment it's still called the Ideation Suite. And it's very much a tool for designers, service designers and product designers, so it's much closer to home for us. Still got the same architecture, but of course, by the time we got to February 2023, GPT had arrived. I think in sort of late January, we were able to get our hands on the API for GPT so that we could plug it directly into our own tool. So we started to explore what would happen if we plugged GPT-3 into what I just showed you. It's quite an interesting experience. I've got some early lessons to talk about. So what is the Ideation Suite? It's probably sort of the most, it's the core exemplar of what we're doing, which is to take existing creative thinking techniques, codify them so that the knowledge about them can be manipulated by our algorithms, and use the interaction design to augment the creative thinking of designers. So we've explicitly targeted 5 techniques. The first 3 are in the first version, and the next 2 will be released next month. So we focus very much on constraint removal, which is the classic out of the box. What constraints are impeding you? What are the assumptions about your problem that are impeding you? Just imagine they go away for a while. Just you remove them. Imagine they don't exist. Surprisingly effective technique. Creativity triggers is one of the techniques that we've specialized, which is saying that at one level of abstraction, creativity repeats. If you look at thousands of creative products and services and ask people about what are the qualities or the features of them, you tend to find the same things come up and up again. So at a certain level of abstraction, creativity repeats. And if you know what those qualities that repeat are, you can direct people to them, make it more playful, make it more environmentally sustainable, these sorts of things. So you can build those into triggers, which we in the old days we present as a set of slides in a workshop and say work with these, but now you can automate them. Scamper, a well-known technique for substituting, combining, adapting, modifying. I'm not going to do the rest. Very simple heuristics. Same with Hall of Fame. Bring in strange extreme personas and imagine they're trying to solve the problem for you. And heuristic ideation, which is the combination of techniques. So we designed a tool to codify knowledge about this and augment its support, and then deliver it both to designers and stakeholders. And one of the fascinating, I think one of the strengths of this tool is you can give it to stakeholders in the design project. many of the times we went into businesses and ran workshops, we could really push the creativity forward for about a day or 2 days when we were in. Then we go back to the office, come back a month later, and we say, what have you done since? Oh, not really, nothing much, you know. So one of our problems was how to keep the stakeholders, and the idea of giving them a sort of simple creativity tool, which is their facilitator, to keep them moving forward, I think is a potential value proposition for the ideation suite. So that's kind of what it looks like. It's a much simpler interface and a much simpler interaction process. Let me just show it to you here. It runs. So the user can start by either describing their challenge in text or uploading a PDF. And I'll show you the PDF upload in a minute. So I've got here an example that was developed in one of our user training sessions with MBA students from the University of Warwick, that customers are increasingly concerned about their environmental impact of their products they buy, and this is threatening future sales. So how do we sort of make our products more environmentally eco-sustainable? So what you can see here is, again, the tools generating these sparks. You've got the tabs to control which techniques to use. So these are constraint removals, which are searching, imagine designing this way or that way. I'm not going to read them out because I have a whole feeling this jumps forward quickly. Same with Scamper. You can see it's got terms like substitute. It's guiding you to combine. It's using you to adapt based on the content that's extracted from this. And you've also got creativity triggers. So what's going on here is the natural language processing is taking away, extracting topics and themes from this and generating the possible topics, and then using them to direct the creative thinking. Just so that this is, you're never quite sure it's finished. And you can tag ideas, and you'll notice there's a little robot face associated with each of the sparks. I'll come on to that in a minute. And at any moment you can refresh. You can see the topics that are extracted from the problem statement here. So it's things like customer values, value and alignment, life cycle of each product. These are the themes that you can edit and change with the tool. And if I go over here, you can then see it running again with the creativity triggers. Yeah, so I can refresh, and you can sort of see lots of interesting ideas here, such as the sale. How should you design for it to be more playful? So how can we make the sales process more playful? And this is now invoking GPT. So you can see these are more typical ideas that are coming out of GPT, but the prompt has been auto-generated by the heuristic reasoning that's led to it. So you've got much more user control over the process, and you don't have to learn how to engineer prompts. So all of this is embedded. I think it does one more down here. Hopefully this is clear to you at home. You can see the screen. You notice we work with text. A lot of people are designing now tools on top of GPT that kind of do the Miro thing with post-its. I don't see the value in that, because you can export our bookmarked ideas into any kind of document very quickly. So anyway, just moving on. So the other thing, I think one of the real benefits of what we designed in this tool is around the PDF upload. So I'm now going to show you a different demonstration. This is a 66-page design report that was produced into the service redesign for UK post offices. So it's when they designed the post office, we moved from standing in queues, a bit like the Full Monty, you know, the film where they do the dance in the queue, and you're too young, right? So you're standing in queues, and then you're going away essentially to taking a ticket when you walk into the service and going sitting down in some armchairs and having a much better experience. So the post office was redesigned in this way. And what I'm going to do is upload. I think I have to push this on actually. Get rid of that. There we go. So basically, I'm uploading this report. And what you'll see here is that I can just ask it to generate sparks. Now, you'll notice here that I've extracted key topics. But what I can do is, what's happening there? Okay, so we're going on. But you can see that I've got complete control over the themes that I want. So I've extracted lots of topics, identified the common topics, and the user control whether I want to focus about creativity associated with frustrations or affordability or value for money. So first of all, it's identify what are the key themes throughout the whole document. You don't have to read the 66-page document to get these. And then at the click of a button, I've been able to generate possibilities. And one further click of the button, you can then imagine by just saying, okay, let's consider the value for money, how we might design for it to communicate and inspire others. You click on the little icon and it will generate ideas in ChatGPT. So basically, with our tool, you can go from hundreds of pages of PDF or PowerPoint to a creativity technique you want to the idea generation on the possibility space. So we think this productivity around creativity is actually quite important. So we've been undertaking formative evaluations with this over the last 3 months. We're generally getting quite positive feedback, but people need to know more how to. We stripped the UI back a little bit too far, so we're building a website around the how to. We found it quite interesting what happened when people were confronted with the opportunity to either look at the sparks, which said these are the spaces to look in, the questions, as opposed to looking at the ideas. Because we'd hope they look at the sparks first and then look at the ideas. They didn't. Like any problem solver, and a lot of cognitive evidence for this, they drilled straight down into the ideas. So they really go down into the spaces, and they tend to realize with GPT, you tend to get a degree of commonality with the ideas emerging, even if you play with the settings. So they then bounce back up and look at the sparks. So typically after 5-10 minutes of looking at ideas, they then say, hey, well, let's think about this more openly. Let's be a bit more creative in the traditional sense and apply a more human reasoning focused approach with the sparks. So there's something quite interesting going on between the emerging interactions designing to encourage people to explore, as opposed to giving people ideas, and we have to do more studies around that, but I think it's interesting. There will be a new release in June, and that is with more techniques and more support, so feel free to log in. I will get there soon. So the last one, Business Sparks. I don't have a demo. It's not due for another couple of weeks. Very much focused on supporting small and medium-sized businesses to think about creativity. The UI is relatively, again, pared back, but the user is able to upload or enter their business challenge. It could be a pitch deck in PowerPoint or whatever. Got the same reasoning. They can decide whether it's a sort of technical problem or a strategic problem with a little slider. You can say something about the company size here. This is partly related to studies that are reported in our new book out on the 5th of July. 5th of July, in which we sort of got a lot of user feedback about what business owners wanted to say about their businesses. And then we do two things. The first is we help the business owner frame their problem. So we've applied machine learning to tens of thousands of business management paper titles and abstracts, everything that's publicly available, in order to come up essentially with different kind of topic maps or cluster maps of the different kinds of business challenges that are out there. So the first thing the tool will do is take your challenge and say, that's quite interesting. Have you thought about it as a human resource management problem or a mergers and acquisitions problem? So in this example, we've used an established training example from one of the big consultancies around a local supermarket chain that is not operating as efficiently. It's got supply chain problems. So most business consultants go, right, it's a supply chain problem. But the tool is automatically saying, what about thinking about it as a human resource management problem? If you looked at that, is it a mergers and acquisitions problem? Do you just buy up the supply chain or parts of it? So immediately it's nudging you into different spaces. By clicking on these, you can then reframe your challenge and you kind of go around. So it's doing the divergent thing quite quickly. And we've been testing that algorithm a lot over the last few weeks. And then once you've got your right broader challenge, you go into the more converged process with the strategies. So our sparks are driven by repeating effective business strategies. There's a lot of this stuff published, strategy, tactics, guidelines that are on the internet and in papers. I've got a small army of masters and MBA students at the moment who are supplementing our AI approach by essentially mining the stuff out of papers. And we're just summarizing it and codifying our sparks that way. So you've got all of the creative thinking combined with this existing knowledge in codified form about business strategies. And then you can bookmark and eventually it will turn into business strategy documents. Our vision here is to use Agent GPT to build an entire business strategy for you based on the ideas that you select. So again, very fast process of challenge through to first cut business strategy so you can go and explore it. So unfortunately, couldn't show that, but stay connected to us. So where are we? I'm here to talk. You may have noticed I do talk. But I am here to talk, and this is my last real slide. So where are we? We're moving through 2023. Sports Sparks is being rolled out in both other professional clubs. So I can say it's being rolled out to Sunderland Football Club, the greatest football team in the world. Some of you know it from the Netflix series, which has been embarrassing. but it is the greatest football club in the world. I'll say that on video. So the coaches at the youth teams are now starting to use it. We're also talking to some teams that play in the Champions League, but I can't talk about those at the moment. But more interestingly, we're rolling out to grassroots coaching, because not only do sporting challenges occur at the elite level, they occur at the under fives level in sort of school teams. And at that level, the coaches are often teachers or parents. They have much less coaching knowledge. So our tool could provide a kind of creative handrail set then to 12. So we're looking at a big UK initiative at the moment. The ideation suite is a new version. Will go out to designers, and we're working with a big German product design company, can't say which one, to run workshops with them in June once that version's available. And then Business Sparks will be rolled out to different consultancies and SME growth agencies. So we're working, I think I can say we're working with Be the Business, which is an organisation that supports SMEs to grow and become more productive. So bolting parts of the tool into their existing platform is a way to go, since everything is service-based. We're really about designing and evaluating together. So we're undertaking lots of formative studies. We're happy for you to get involved if you want to test some of this stuff. We can even take Drupal feedback. We're hardened to it. I'm moving into designing more summative evaluation studies to explore particular research questions about AI, creativity, innovation, and productivity. I think these are themes that are writ large. And as I just alluded to, all of our software is like a stack. So it's not, you see the UI, but then it's like a series of different services that pass calls to each other, which means if you're interested in the topic modeling part, we could give you access to it via a call, an API. Or you're interested in Spark generation, we could give you that without needing the whole of the Business Spark app. So we're happy to discuss these things, obviously with the right framings around them. And all of this is really part of partnership building. And that's me. You can reach us on Twitter via Seabase Center, because I'm not on Twitter. And my email address is there, and it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed talking. Fine.
Thanks a lot. So we have also a scarcent, Thomas von Baum.
Yes.
If you want to go out and introduce yourself.
Of course. So, hi everybody, I'm Thomas van Wout. I'm a co-founder of Bolt Influence. We are an influence marketing agency based in Paris, working with brands such as Accor, PlayStation, really big companies, and mostly on short vertical format content, so short video like TikTok or Reels. And of course, creativity is really important for us, because what's makes influence working is creative ideas. And we always starting to think about new campaigns based on trends. Maybe you have heard on trends, TikTok or pop culture. Pop culture is very important today, because influence marketing grew a lot, and all the campaign looks the same. And now what we try to do is really try to imagine campaigns that can touch the culture and make people remember about the product, the message, everything. So that's why it's really always interesting to discuss about the idea. And maybe I have first question to start, because I've seen the tool and I'm really impressed about how we can solve problems and how we can help people to think, and based on existing content. I'm not aware about productive rights. For example, I've wrote a paper on creative, etc. And now it's in a product, and it leads to new idea, maybe, because you said. So how is it working for?
That's a very good question. The IP law around AI generated content is behind the curve. You can see this in Europe, okay. You can see this in the UK, but there are laws that can protect copyright. I've become very aware of those. Earlier products that we designed did use more online published content, but we've actually tried to move away from that. So it's about codifying knowledge that we are eliciting and we are extracting from themes. So it's interesting if you take an established creativity technique like Scamper and you just say, you write 7 simple rules in a reasoning, try substituting this with this. I think that's general knowledge.
Yeah.
So I think there are a lot of AI tools which are search-based and seek to extract and generate content from content that is what copyright or IP protected. I mean, GPT is, you know, let's be honest, it's just trampled all over. It's most people's copyright and IP, and there is, from my understanding, a long list of legal cases. So I think it's maybe hard for companies to take action against OpenAI, but I think if you're running a smaller business, you're quite exposed. So our approach is very much to try and negotiate access to content. So I mentioned for Sports Sparks, we're working with UK Coaching, which is a big UK organisation that supports coaching at all levels. They have, I think, 2,000 pages of online content with links. We've integrated that content into the tool via our background indexing, but only with permission from them. And that's the important thing here, because I think you have to respect other people's content. There's a huge business risk there. You could get taken to court. And I think also there are other ways. I think this codified approach, focusing on what really matters around creativity, codifying the knowledge yourself, is a way to go. The last thing I'd say is, I mean, if our algorithm discovers an academic paper that's been published and the publisher owns the IP, and we highlight it to a user saying, look at this paper and its original source and think about this and this theme from it. Surely that's enhancing access to the content rather. So it's how you use it as well. I think that's important. Be very transparent about the links. We don't reframe anything. So if you want to look at an academic paper, it opens a new tab in a browser rather than reframing that content in our own tool. So I think these are problems that organizations working in this space are building up themselves. And because we're trying to be more business focused, we're looking to design to avoid them.
Interesting. Another question linked to that content. You say that you scrap the web to find content. You have also maybe master's students helping you to find the right papers. But we've seen that the content now academical is still papers, but a lot of content are available in videos, YouTube, conference, things like that. How can you address that content also, or will you address maybe there is transcript now, so maybe we can.
Yeah, you can. I mean, with sports, I mean, one of the early pieces of feedback that came from coaches for sports coaching was we were giving people access to academic papers around metatarsal injuries and all sorts of things that footballers suffer. And many of the coaches said, "This is interesting, but I've got an average first degree. This content's beyond me." So the user feedback is videos, YouTube channels, and then it becomes a curation problem because it's about trust. There's an awful lot of content out there which is actually more dangerous. So the main issue becomes curation. So as part of our co-design team, we have sports coaches, experienced sports coaches that coached UK Olympic teams that won medals. And they are able to direct us to the possible YouTube channels or blogs that we would then link people to. And so our engine is searching through the APIs that are published for those blogs and tools. We're always going through the published APIs. We very rarely scrape. I shouldn't say that, by the way. We don't. No, it's okay. It's a fair question to ask. We are going through the formal APIs.
Okay, you're connected.
Yeah, but the key thing is the quality of the content. I think you can damage your own tool, your own service, if you're putting out the wrong content there. So to me, it's the curation question, and that comes down to working with the right people.
Another question about what I like on the tool, because as everybody, I've tried ChatGPT, and as you said, it's giving straight guidelines. Sometimes you say, I want a diet plan. I don't know why I say that, but I want a diet plan. But it gives you the diet plan based on objectives, and and you don't. Yes, you can also discuss, but I find it way more, way less user-friendly than that possibility to highlight some topics and have really. And do you think, because ChatGPT is big, and do you think they will copy that, or are they, they will stay in?
I don't think that OpenAI themselves will copy it, because I think they're really around the back end. ChatGPT was probably one of the most genius marketing stunts of the last decade. You have to give me credit for that, right? It was a brilliant idea, simply executed. So I've forgotten the question. Sorry, I was just thinking about something.
Oh, sorry. It's do you think?
Yeah,
that,
otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry.
I will
No.
just give
I
you the same.
I think other organizations are rushing to wrap GPT access services in simple web tools. So if you look now, I'm not going to name them while I give ourselves competition, but over the last 2 or 3 months since the API appeared, you're seeing these very simple web tools that sort of say, tell me what you want, and it will critique the idea. There's another one that takes your business challenge and imagines what Porter would say about it and what others would say. It's these really simple things. You can see what it's doing. You just have the spinning wheel of death for about 2 minutes while it generates the content in the background. So I think there's going to be a market of GPT-enabled interactive creative thinking tools. But I suspect the majority of them are not generated by people who have an in-depth knowledge of creativity and have a lot of practice with creative thinking techniques and how to make them work in practice. And I think that's one of our USPs. So I think that's the direction that is more likely to go. You're also, I think, seeing other kinds of tools. And I mentioned in the talk Agent GPT, and I think this is where it gets more interesting, is how can you then design interactive tools that will enable you to control agents which are themselves controlling GPT to build entire business strategies in parallel and bring these pieces together. And what's the interaction of that going to look like? Because you do have these very simple text-based tools that look a bit like ChatGPT, but I don't think most business owners are going to be able to get their heads around this. The last thing I just want to say about the plan, you mentioned plans. When GPT arrived in November, I think everybody working in this space went, right? And we took some of our sports coaching challenges, just put them into the chat.
Yeah. And
it was fascinating. It started recommending all kinds of herbal remedies and sorts of things that you just know a professional sports person would risk being banned for. And I think on their own, because there is no explicitly codified knowledge, there's no rule base, there's no domain model, I think that's a major limitation for businesses. Yeah, it's just, in anything with some sensitivity, I don't think it's reliable. There's just a huge business risk to you there. So I think they have to be combined with these other forms of reasoning, with domain models and case-based reasoning, rule-based reasoning. I think it's essential if they're going to become part of the mainstream armory of businesses. That's a key argument I've reached. This is why I think we need to go back. And I'm teaching PhD students next month about AI, and I'm going back to symbolic reasoning, because most people's understanding, looking around at your faces, your ages, trying to imagine, you guys think it's machine learning and these kinds of things. It isn't. There's many other ways of enabling a machine to reason or appear to reason, which we can control more effectively.
Maybe one last question from my side. We've seen that even with your tool really simplified and really user-friendly, I hope I understood well, but at the end you said that the people were just rushing to the ideas and not refining what they can have.
Yeah.
Do you think that we will have more and more training on how to use AI, or it will be like Google, say, okay, everybody use Google, but everybody use it bad, and nobody's trained to use Google properly?
I don't know. The problem is, I'd like to say that there would be training on, say, prompt engineering, but the difficulty is the engines were evolving so fast. You actually go behind you look in the other parts of chat, if you go into the playground part of GPT, there are all these kind of settings. I can't remember what they're called now, but one is about the breadth of the responses and other ones around the accuracy and length. And you endlessly have to play with these settings, experimenting, even if you're really quite technically knowledge, to set the algorithms to get precisely what you might want of a certain number of words or of certain breadth or narrowness of content. There may be a level of interaction above that could be developed, but it still requires you to be able to manipulate and define different settings. So my feeling is no, certainly, because also the AI is just going to evolve underneath it. So whatever we manage to build or support people to do quickly become out of date. I mean, my technical team struggled to keep up with the evolution of GPT and what it's doing. Because outcomes that worked 2 weeks ago don't seem to work anymore. Why? So I can't see how these people with computer science PhDs, I think it's going to be beyond, in its current form, beyond most people. That's, who knows? They may be working on something that solves this problem that I struggle with.
If you know, thanks a lot, Neil. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Because you have a creative work, because you create, so you are required in your profession to be very creative.
Yes.
So I'm interested if you are using AI and how the agency that AI may have impact on your creativity, which is your perception based on the practice.
So I'm not a professional of AI, so I try to really open very large. We use more and more tool AI-based. For example, we run some tests with Midjourney. So and we were amazed about what we can produce just for a presentation, because sometimes it's not something that will be published. It's just something to illustrate a concept for a client, something that it would have take a lot of time to explain to our graphic designer, get the right a lot of meetings and a lot of feedback to have one image is just 10% better than just typing in Midjourney and say, okay, I want this picture with that on foreground, that on background, and it does the job. It doesn't have to be print. It doesn't have to be. It's just efficient for illustrating with a visual ID. So we run some tests with Midjourney. So we are not using it officially, but we run some tests. Of course, we tried ChatGPT for content creation, because we have also a social media work, but wasn't very effective for us because it's changing a lot, and the ID that ChatGPT suggested was very non-ID. If you know the sector, but maybe if you're a newcomer, it will be something very astonishing. Of course, get back to the design part. For example, I'm doing a lot some photography, or I've said some graphing sometimes. And I remember some years ago, if you had to remove a background from an image, it took ages with Photoshop to do the mask, to delete, and to play with the color. And now there is website, you just upload the capture and it removes the background automatically and saves a lot of time. So yes, there is more and more EA-based tools that we are using. We are not experimenting everything, unfortunately, but it's really useful. And when I see what we can do on the ID process, creative process, if we had a tool like yours for a influence campaign, it could be very interesting, because we have the brief, we have the objective of the customer. We can upload all this strategy and say, okay, if you are performance sales objective, what could be the best idea? And we have a really big range of different proposition, and we have to refine and try, and really useful, because as we discussed before, all the work in communication agency, you are always rushing. So finally, creativity is like you don't have time for creativity. You're just efficient, and sometimes our ideas are not the most creative ones, because we had one day to answer a customer. But if we had a tool that can really help us think out of the box, it will really help us to be more efficient.
All right, just on that, I think AI can help us find a sweet spot between creativity and productivity. I think we tended to think of these two as opposite, because I need to be exploratory, I need to incubate, it takes time, it slows me down, I create too many possibilities, you can't get the brief done in a day. But an AI that seeks to find that sweet spot of helping you do things really quickly, but generating novel, surprising outcomes of value at the same time, that's where business will buy into it, I think. Because business leaders looking at productivity, they're looking at efficiency. How do we do things? That's the sweet spot to me.
I can really show an example. For example, I'm good at gaming. I'm playing video games in 30 years, so I know everything about gaming. Meaning that if I have PlayStation asking me for a campaign, in one day I can have a lot of reference, I can have a lot of ideas because it's my background. But if tomorrow Nix asked me to do a campaign about a new makeup thing, I don't have a clue. And if the people in my team is not available with all the knowledge, I will have to figure out something, but not as good as what an expert could have done. And if you have all these resources available, matching with some criteria, you can really deserve, I would say that, achieve better idea, campaign, inspiration, really faster than.
Yes, I have a bunch of questions, but I won't monopolize the words. About the business part,
Yes.
I'm very interested in it. There is maybe a suggestion that will interest Frédéric. When we are making students working on the case on inventing a business, for instance, maybe they can use the Sparking business tool to challenge their own idea. So it can be an educational program.
Absolutely, no, I agree with that. I mean, the idea of a business spark came out of working. There's a colleague of mine called Charles Barton Fuller, very well known in the field of strategy, and he works on a project called Business Model Zoo. The metaphor is the zoo, that you have these well-defined business models, and they exist in these little cages. And he has a website, and it's a taxonomic approach. You go online, you ask a couple of questions, and it finds the right business model for you. But of course, life's more complicated than that. And I think I asked him one day, do you ever encourage anybody to think creatively about their business models? And the simple answer is no, that's not quite true, right? But I said, are there any techniques that people generally? No. So I think this creatively challenging your business models, I think, is absolutely central. It's what became out of. We tried various permutations of this, which is what you read in chapter 6 of our new coming book, actually. And it's, in the end, we actually challenged the nature of a business model. We turned it kind of inside out from the sense that Charles had. But it's really the business model is about all the questions you need to ask in order to think creatively about that business model. And it's not necessarily a new model, it's your existing. So I think future versions of this will be very much in the critique mode. Upload all of that content, because we do have a component, I should have said this, that enables you to upload a large amount of content, produce a kind of semantic map of it, and then feed that into these tools. Not just one document at a time. And if you can do that with all of your business strategy content, it gets really interesting. We're actually putting in a bid today for UK funding to do that with a leading consultancy business. So I would fully support that, and any tool for educational purposes certainly make it available to scale out that business.
Yeah, on the next question on the subject,
yeah.
If this tool is connected to ChatGPT,
yep.
maybe, and the question is if SME has a confidential business case,
yeah.
and wants to submit it to the creative business spark tool, will the confidential information be dismissed to ChatGPT and so on? And what is the guarantee that using your tool, things are not going to go in the nether?
Right. This is still on recording, isn't it? So the way that you look at the mechanics of how it works, if let's say there's a 40-page strategy document, it's confidential, we would sign an agreement with that business. Our engines would not store that document, but they would parse it as you would. If you could say Google Translate, you upload a PDF or something to Google Translate, it would extract the key themes from it, and you would be able then, and we would have those themes. Now, whether or not those themes themselves are confidential, that's a question we would have to explore. But the themes would not be seen in the context in which they're combined in the text. So the themes would be then fed into our tools, which would generate sparks. And some of those themes would still be present in sparks that then feed the GPT prompts. So some of those themes, by definition, have to find their way into the prompts. Now, yes, GPT learning could then sort of learn from those, but I think that I'm not expecting a volume of use of our tools that it would necessarily influence the the machine learning. So yes, that's an inevitable risk if you want to engage a creative agency in a challenge that you have. It would be the same, you pass this on and there'd be an NDA to your agency. So, but we're aware of that one. It comes back to this sort of having looked at how previous research projects have done this and just thought, really? Can't commercialize that. So there's a risk, but it has to be managed.
Okay. Just last question for the sport system.
Yes.
Did you implement like in medicine a double-blind test so that you have some coach are using your system, other not, and you check the result of the team?
We haven't, but one of the reasons I'm here is if people want to run those kinds of studies, then I would be more than happy. I mean, honestly, I think that's it, because we haven't got the resources. It's very difficult to be in a kind of social science research mode to do that at the same time as being in product design and code design. So I'm more than happy for people to do that, and we will accept whatever the results are. My instinct is, well, I said at the end, we'll be happy to shape the research questions. We have an understanding what I think are the really interesting research questions to ask around productivity and efficiency related to this. But I think that's a study to be done. We weren't funded to do that. My team was not funded to do that, which is a shame. So part of the reason for being here is to encourage you, along with our other base colleagues, to do that.
Yeah, in fact, the invitation is also to see the potential synergies that could be put in place between the schema center, artificial intelligence, and the center on AI.
Everything I've shown you at the moment is freely available in the form that I've shown it. So you just, like Thomas has, you can just use the URLs and you can circulate them afterwards. And sports box, you have to create account ideation suite, you don't.
Yeah, because
I have a question for you, Thomas. Since these AI tools, they are quite simple to use and user friendly. So I'm wondering, are you seeing or do you think that there is a shift, there's a changes in division of work in creative thinking? For example, for the companies that hire you, maybe they would use these AI tools to generate the ideas, or they make the specification themselves, and then there's a change of the division of work.
I think so. I think it's moving really fast, maybe faster than what I imagine. We already heard about a campaign done with AI generated people. I think it's Undies. It's underwear companies that have really done everything about as a how to say that the characters are really AI based. Coca-Cola just released them as really only mostly done by AI. So meaning, I think they see the value because, as I said, it's all about time and what can reduce time and doing effective job. Because I think the results are really good. I think sweet spots, as Neil said. So yes, it's really going faster and faster, and I think it's a key today to be aware and starting to use this tool that could become a standard tomorrow. I don't know if you answer the
Yes.
Thanks very much, fascinating for your presentation. Thank you. Fascinating stuff. And maybe my questions are more related to the evaluation as well, in a way. But I've been doing some work for a few years on AI and automation in science, and I think science is essentially part of the creative industry. My colleagues from the University of Manchester and still have PhD students working on this. And you were talking about productivity. And actually, I had a question for you exactly which actually we responded to. Do you see them as complementary or if there are tensions? Because what we saw, what I did, is I did ethnographic work with scientists and a lot of interviews. I'm a qualitative researcher, and what I was seeing was actually that in a way, technologies are sort of embedded in social practice. And for AI, yeah, there was an idea and intention that it would increase creativity in terms of discovery or potential paths for science or questions for them to ask. what was happening was that it was mainly framed as a tool for productivity instead of creativity. It was getting in the way of creativity because they would be rushing to get projects done, completed, not necessarily the most creative ones, but the ones that were the lower hanging fruit. And I suppose, and my question actually, it would be if you had any experience with the organizations that have adopted or some of these tools, and how do you see them once they get embedded in social practice, if the way they are used change, and maybe related to this, my second and final question, have you observed whether these tools are used mostly individually, or if they're used as well as part of teamwork, and if they could potentially enhance also human and human collaboration? Because that's my impression of using ChatGPT myself, or with colleagues from computer sciences, and actually developing research that is human-led, human-centered.
Yeah.
So that was my question.
I got a stack of three here.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm an old man now, so I'm going to go through.
No, that's it.
No, that's fine. I'm going to stop you there anyway, because I'm stuck with the overflows. So the first thing I say quickly, I think there's a lot of ways you can design AI to be creative, to impede productivity. I think the outcome, the sweet spot that we've just started sharing here, is really in the design. You've got to design it for both. And I think there are ways to design it, and that's what one of our key outcomes. So the first thing is the design choice. And if some tools don't deliver it, maybe, I'm saying it is, but maybe because it's poorly designed. The productivity versus creativity angle is fascinating. So we ran into this in journalism. So when we were talking to journalists about our augment tool, which gives creative guidance to journalists writing stories, the journalists were all for creativity. We didn't sell €1 worth product or license on the value of creativity, because what businesses need, certainly in news, certainly when the pandemic came along, was increased efficiency and productivity. So actually there's an interesting tension between what workers tend to want, I'm going to use this language quite pejoratively, workers and the managers, and there's a tension there. So in some senses, if you can find a way, we don't market our approach now for creativity per se. You go to the Ject AI website, it talks about creative intelligence, but it's about now finding more efficient ways of working. We built plugins to content management systems, so our tool is no longer a standalone tool. It's a little plugin that appears on the right-hand side. And it's, in some senses, this is going to be, I think, how a lot. I'm presenting standalone tools because I don't know what to plug them into. But the Microsoft Copilot room, I think, is a demonstration of where the next generation of this stuff will appear. It will be embedded into your Word application. It will be embedded into your spreadsheets. It will be embedded into your search. So I think I haven't really addressed the sort of social uptake point, but I think the AI will become, to a degree, invisible. And it already is. I mean, we can't talk about AI as this is new stuff. This stuff is like tons of stuff. My phone, and yeah, I don't think of it that way. So I think it'll become invisible, and it'll be a broader issue of socio-technical design around these products. Third point around communication is quite interesting. We have steered clear of designing tools for creative collaboration because the marketplace was already quite busy before the pandemic with the Muros and the Murals and all these people, and the communications building these kinds of shared collaboration platforms are really technically very hard. It's quite simple functionality-wise, but from a technical perspective, it's hard. And so we steer clear of it. We have deliberately designed for individual creativity. But of course, you could do what I showed here, for example, with the post office example, and run the tool as a separate agent. So what I have done in workshops is, certainly when we've been on Zoom or Teams, people have been on their various rooms doing brainstorming with some sort of shared space, a mural board or something like this. And I'm running the tool. I'm listening to what people are saying, feeding it into early versions of the ideation suite and putting it out there as possible ideas. So I think the tool could be adopted for use, but our deliberate decision is not to support the collaboration process unless you can embed it into the existing now de facto tools. We're not going to challenge Mural for that space. No chance. What's the point in even trying? I hopefully have answered some of the questions there. There's quite a lot in it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
It's all right.
Thank you.
Okay, then, because we are already 1:30, so
Yes.
we are.
Maybe you can check online. There is just
Yeah.
an online question.
No, there are no questions.
Okay.
Question.
Well, I was kind of wondering actually. So you talked a lot about codified knowledge and symbolic AI, and so the little I know about it is the example of like in medicine where IBM tried to do codified knowledge for doctors and it didn't work out. Why did you think in your case it would work out better?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, yes, there's a bit of a bad press for the kind of 1980s expert systems, but they're still in use. I mean, it's horses for, there's an expression in English, horses for courses. You use the right technologies for the right kinds of problem. And there's quite a lot of evidence that these symbolic AI technologies still work. So if you go to the journals such as Expert Systems and Expert Systems in Applications, you do read there are case studies showing that this works in certain kinds of business function where the knowledge is more static and it can be codified this way. And I think it's an issue about the level of abstraction. So when I codify creativity knowledge, by and large, I'm talking about knowledge which applies across domains, which is much harder to do if you're talking about a particular diagnosis of lung cancer based on verbal reported symptoms by a patient. So, I think there are uses for this. I think we should recognize that case-based reasoning has been very effective. People like to work by case-based reasoning. People like to work from prior cases. In fact, a lot of business management research works that way, right? It's case based. So I think we have to kind of support it. And you have to have external explicit representation of those cases, of those rules, because it's not explicitly codified in machine learning or generative AI. And you can control it. The important thing is, I mean, one thing I found with sports coaches is that spark is wrong. Can you fix it? Yes, we can take it out if you want. You do that with generative AI. Can't. You can sort of build an override to stop it appearing, but you can't. So that I think these technologies are really going to take hold, and businesses are going to manage the risks. They have to have that degree of control. Otherwise, you're just in the hands of big American corporates.
Exactly. And then there is an open area of research related to the agency that you give to the algorithms, to the level of control, how these impact creativity. So especially,
it opens up a whole new sphere of interesting problems.